Hey everyone, it's Mike Andes. I'm the founder of Augusta Lawn Care. We have over 150 locations around the world. And today is really special. I've never done this before. We're actually going to share an internal coaching call that I had with some of our multi-unit owners inside of Augusta Nation.
I wasn't sure if we were going to do the third location.
If you're trying to scale the business up and you're trying to balance out how do I grow, but also how do I actually make sure that I don't go take too much debt? Should I use debt?
I said, man, I did it on $5,000 2 years ago. Yeah, we can do it.
This is going to be a great conversation that you'll want to listen to, and I encourage you to get a part of a community like this, whether it be a Facebook group, a franchise, whether it be a conference, anywhere where you can get together with like-minded individuals that are going through the same obstacles as you is super beneficial. Let's go ahead and roll the tape.
So you don't have a lot of debt right now, right?
Uh, 20,000, I think, in the
Um,
business stuff.
so we just got matter of fact, I wasn't sure if we were going to do the third location because the banker, he just was taking about a month and it was kind of concerned to me. So I said, hey man, just let me know what I need to do today. I'm about to buy plane tickets. He's like, well, you're going to get the loan. He said, I've been busy. I got promoted, yada yada. So I thought we were going to put money down on the loan. And so he just took all my assets, so all the trucks are paid for. And then he even took, I forget what he called it, but like on mowers and things like that. I think UCH or whatever it's called. Yeah, UCH, I think it was. He's going to give whatever values on our books for like the mowers. And he was able to, we wanted 150. And I was thinking I was going to put down 20%. And so he's like, hey man, I can't get you 150. He said, but I can get you in between 100 and 125. Can you still do it with that? And I said, man, I did it on $5,000 2 years ago. Yeah, we can do it. And I was like, what's the down payment? He said, oh, there's no down payment. I was like, oh, excellent. So I thought I was going to come up with
Doable.
$30,000. And so I don't know if your relationship with your bank. I don't know if all banks work like that, but you might not have to come out of pocket at all. And this and the loan, what I sent over, I'll share it with you if you want to see it, the express the projections, and then where exactly we were going to spend the money. Um, it had working capital in it. It had like a $30,000 marketing budget and $30,000 of working capital just to get to profitability. And so I don't know if that's typical. I know it's a small bank. I went to school with the guy. I don't know if that has anything to do with it, but I've never gotten a loan like this. I didn't have to put any money down, and he just took my assets as collateral. So
Gotcha.
Huge
yeah,
fan
That
of a
was
small
ex-
bank.
That's how my
yeah,
banks work here too. It's a local little small bank. I work directly with the guy that owns it. Like that's how a lot of I think small banks kind of work if you're a business and stuff. That's the way our line of credit works and any loans that we've got. No, they usually don't pay anything down.
Given that
Yeah, the
Kyle
pre
keeps his shit together, like we should be generally always profitable in Bloomington now. And like the goal is to get Champaign the same way. And so my thought is to continue just open locations with debt rather than put my money up front. Is that is that what everybody's plan is pretty much?
I'm very risky, so
Yeah.
um, I don't mind risk. I'd much rather use the bank's cash for sure. But that's just for me.
Regardless of
Um,
interest, or do you pay attention to what the interest is? Because I know I could go get 150
10%.
tomorrow, 10%. Yeah.
yeah, I'm like 10 or lower. I don't really think twice about under five for sure. I don't really think about it all. Like I get
Yeah.
closer to 10, I'll ponder it a little bit over 10. I'm like, probably not. It's kind of my rules.
And then
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you, is anybody chasing after Peoria, right? Like, do you know of anybody interested in Peoria? Like,
Two
what
years
would
ago, there were some guys. Yeah, 2 year there were some guys that were interested, but the Peoria location's broken to three now. So East Peoria, Peoria, and Pekin. And so I had my call with Lee the other day and basically put my name on East Peoria. And I just said, if somebody calls, just let me know and I'll write you a check so we can buy it. Um,
yeah.
but that, I mean, that's 15 minutes closer than Peoria is. It's on the side of the river. So it's 30 minutes from my house. It's way closer than Champaign, but it's not as good a market either.
Okay. That's how it was very honestly. I'm just now getting into profit. And I would love for another year of just that. There was two things. One, Chris was really showing promise and I wanted to grow because of him. And then the other reason was I had two people call. One person didn't have the funds, so that didn't count. But the second person just sold his business and had a lot of money to grow this fast, and he was going to pull the trigger. So I told Lee, I was like, well, I'll buy it. So
Yeah.
that was my reasoning. So I was thinking like in your position, Dustin, unless you like if you had to go one more year of stabilizing this, what does that do for you and your wife? Cash reserves, her sense of stability, your GM sense of stability in their roles versus
Yeah.
starting Peoria. What do you think?
I think my GM in Champaign that we just hired is gunning for 3F program, like hard. That's the only reason why he's like gunning for the general manager spot and to begin with. Like he's like, I'll move down there, whatever you need. Like just tell me what to do. He's already taken stuff on himself to get promoted to that spot. And he's my cousin too, so he's like very upfront. Like just tell me what I need to do so that I don't have to be a high school teacher like my dad. Like he's anything to get out of the situation that he's in, basically. And so I know he's wanting like 2 or 3 years of GM checks, is what he's saying, to be able to put money in the bank. He's made some mistakes while he's up here, totaled like 2 or 3 cars. So he's dug himself a little bit of a hole. Two of them weren't his fault, so that helps a little bit. But yeah, he's just like, as soon as I get the money to go start a location in Kansas City, I'm moving back down there. So I think I have, a solid 2 years of getting Champaign to stability. And honestly, like Kate still has a great job. So it's not like we need the money from the locations. We're still living off of just her income. And all of our draws are just going into the account and just sitting there basically. So like the stability aspect of the locations is just, keep Bloomington rolling and get Champaign ramped up enough to where it can move into profit mode.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, cool. I mean, yeah, I think as far as if you're stable, I mean, I know your long-term plan is to grow just like all of ours. So as long as you're stable and you're good with it, I mean, seems like a good idea.
I think my risk tolerance would go up to if both of your locations are in profit mode. Like as soon as you cross that threshold, I think
Yeah.
it becomes almost obvious for her, even just from a tax savings perspective.
Yeah.
Like you're like, hey, look, we're making 140, $150,000 in that on our taxes. We're gonna give 30 grand of that away, or we're gonna go start another location. Like, what do you want to do? Then it starts to make a lot of sense. Like when you have taxes, but see if you leverage yourself too, the same thing will happen because you don't have to pay taxes on obviously the cash you get from the debt. So it kind of like getting debt is kind of you have to get on the treadmill of growth because now you're going to inflate your profits to the government and you're like, oh snap, now I got to spend more of it from a tax savings perspective. So
Yeah. Cool. Thanks, guys.
You know that you guys
And
should have
isn't
had your tax calls or have your tax calls. Mine's tomorrow.
I just had mine. He's gonna save me some money too. Thank God for Brad.
I don't
I
make
got a
enough
new
money
lady
to
this
pay
year,
you.
and I think she's gonna be good. So we'll see.
and
go
thanks
ahead,
for doing
Connie.
this, Mike. This has been awesome.
Yep.
I got
Go ahead, Connie.
I got two things real quick. And I'm about to get on the roof, so I'll kind of just spout them out real quick. One, how do we prioritize? The only framework that we've been trying out recently is like for me and for Thomas, as like I didn't even have the regional manager position dialed in before we put him in there. So he had 2 GMs. He's down 2 GMs in the last 2 weeks. Like it's getting real for him right now. One because of personal issues, and then one because of performance. One we saw coming. We were planning for that. How does he prioritize? Because he also now is having team member issues because of the GMs in those locations, and so like there's work not getting done. Like he feels like he's all over the place. Our current prioritizing strategy is like make a list of everything you could do, label them. This like came from Alex. Label them, find the one that's number one, cross everything else out. Because number one might solve the rest. But like, I also don't want to like create massive holes, especially like going into winter and then trying to prepare for spring rush. The second part was kind of back to the debt. I was just curious, like, how do you calculate debt and like when does it make cash flow or profitability like worse with having interest? Like when is it, how do you figure out when it's not worth it? And then do you think there would be a balance in or a benefit in getting the locations to distributable cash if they're not there, even if it means they have some interest, because a GM could see like, oh, I'm at that level, because like some like our locations, some of them are like so far off that it just like it's like Fugazi. It's not like P for P. If the guys try hard, they see it like in 2 weeks on their paycheck. This is like, we're like, hey, a couple months from now, a year from now, it doesn't like, I don't know if it equates.
Yeah. So I would say, like, first off, on the prioritization thing, the thing I'm always looking for is what domino can I hit and hit 5 of the things that's listed, right? So obviously it can be like, hey, yes, there's 1,000 things we could be doing, but what one of these, if I do, I can knock out 15 of the others. And so, for example, the one thing I look at a lot of times when there is a massive catastrophe happening from an HR perspective, like GMs being removed, a mutiny in the team, you have to fire a bunch of people, as I'm immediately looking at training. Because if I can anchor the team, then like there's a trickle down of better P4P, which increases morale, less yellow slips, less customer churn, higher customer satisfaction, etc. So like there's so much trickle down from just getting them trained correctly. Um, but like that's generally how I'm thinking about prioritization is like I am going to, yes, list all the things I need to be doing, but then it's like if I did this one thing, what take care of all these others? And so for example, like with Logan's, like there's probably 1,000 things that could be done, but like we know if we can get these 2 locations into above 500,000, that a lot of things start to take care of themselves. And so that's where it's like, okay, then sales is the bottleneck. So it's like realizing what the bottleneck is. And you and I have talked about, Connor, like this year is going to be how do you find general managers and train them up? Like that is the bottleneck for, managing as many locations as you have. And that's the skill that will be required. And so I would say like that's still the quote bottleneck, but then it's like, well, what happens when everything just is like, the GMs literally leave? Now what? I'm usually going back to how do I get the team on the same page? Because like if they can just all be more accountable and less more autonomous, I will have to manage less, and it's a way less burden of my time. Go ahead.
Oh, I was saying right.
Yeah, and then from the debt perspective, like the most aggressive form. What's up, dude? The most aggressive form of like using debt is actually some people will say if you can just cash flow, and the most aggressive form is if you can just cover interest payments. Because technically when you're paying down principal, you're essentially just putting money from this pocket into the other. Because you got the money and now you're giving it back to the bank as principal. It's there's actually no transaction. That's why it doesn't show up on the P&L. So like the most aggressive form of expansion is if I can cover my interest payments with the profits that come from the business, I should keep growing. Because in theory, eventually the principal will go to zero and eventually I will be extremely profitable. It's just how long are you willing to hold your breath? Because if you have a 5-year loan, what that means is if I can just cover the interest expense with the profit, that means once the 5 years is done, the principal payment is now going in my pocket instead of back to the bank. So like that's the most aggressive form. Then the next, like the second degree of risk is going to be, can I cash flow from day one? Which is with my interest expense and my principal pay down, am I able to cash flow? And then it's a matter of like, that's why I always say you got to get above 20,000 at every location, because if you take the amount of debt required to grow the location to that size, typically you're looking around $1,500 to $2,000 of a monthly payment. And I've got to cover that in addition to a general manager's wages. And so if I'm taking straight debt, that's why you almost have to get above 20,000 as fast as possible. Because
If you're taking debt.
correct. Yeah. Because you got a GM, let's just call them $6,000 a month. And then you got fixed expenses, and then you got the cost of the debt itself. If you're not above 20, you will lose money. It's just like you will lose money. And so if you can cash flow from day one, like, as fast as possible, that's why like always giving that ramp for the 3 months, get people above 20 as fast as possible is the goal. But in terms of like paying it back, et cetera, it's like what degree of risk are you willing to take? Because there are people that will literally look at the interest rate and say, okay, 10% of $1 million, if I just make $100,000 in profit, I'm happy because I'm just literally giving the money back to the bank at the same dollar amount. If I can just cover the interest expense, I'm happy. That's extremely risky, because you always have the issue of like a depreciating asset that doesn't last the term of the loan. So for example, a truck that gets crashed at 2 years, all of a sudden now you have a principal pay down, like you have a massive deficit on that loan.
What do you think it does like to the mental though for the GM? Like if if I accept the risk, like do you think like it being able, like for them to be able to see it, like if we're setting the bar at 50K and I put the bank at 50K, like, yes, they have to, yes, there's the principal payback, right? Like the principal and interest, but them being able to see that, do you think like that would be a shift for a lot of people? Because like I'm just finding it really hard, like unless somebody is somebody that wants to go into the 3F program and like they learn about that soon and like they're really interested in it, like Thomas, for example, they don't have like the long-term thinking to like say wait a year to start actually getting the upside of 20% profit sharing, right?
That's when I just really incentivize the growth. Cause like I gotta get them above 20. So like I would put massive bonuses around like 10, 15, and 20, get them above it as fast as possible. And so like if a location is not above 20, I know I'm losing money. I would rather lose the money to their bonus than I'm just burning cash because the location is below a certain revenue threshold. And so, we now have it where it's like even once they're in profit mode, they make a bonus per month based upon their revenue. So it's like 20,000, 40,000, 60,000. And so I would incentivize probably 10, 15, and 20 for your
We
locations,
found
Connor.
we
Go ahead.
found those ranges to be too wide, like because we kept doing that and like every month, like right in the middle of the month, like, and constantly I would remind them, but like in our one-on-one that was in the middle of the month, I would like sit down with the GMs and I'm like, hey, like currently projecting like with what we have on the schedule, you're $2,000 off from your next bonus, and just like I don't know.
One thing we're trying with my new GM down in Champaign is making those closer. And so we're doing $5,000 increments. And so it's not like I think the
Unobtainable.
location, yeah, the location's like 25,000, I think, average a month, like towards the end of the summer. And it's like 30,000 is 250 bucks, 40,000 is like $500, and it's every month. It's based on revenue for the first year with the end goal of like, hey, your salary is going to increase by like, I think it's 5 or 10 grand. I don't remember what it is, given the fact that the average is like 45 by the end of the year. And then we'll go to distributable cash because the location will go into profit mode. So it's like highly revenue incentivized in year one. And then year two, it's like given that we hit the revenue goal average by the end of the year, we're going to switch to distributable cash.
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough though, kind of to your points. Like if someone's not money motivated to make an extra 2 grand in that month in order to unlock $500 for themselves, like that's tough. Like that's a couple projects to be able to knock out. Um, so it's the money motivation part is hard. I think you could also, to Dustin's point, instead of even doing like locking it, you could just do a percentage. So for example, 1% of 20 grand is what? $200. So is that right? Yeah, $200. And so you could say, okay, well, we're gonna get 5%. Well, then you get 5% of like everything up until a certain threshold of revenue. You could do that. And then every dollar they're making, essentially they're getting a cut of it. I would probably say something like anything above 20,000 a month, you get a percentage of. So like they got to get above that, and then anything above that is higher. So you basically like, hey, I know that my break even on a location is usually around 20 grand. And so anything above that, I'll give you 6%, 7%, 8%, whatever you want to set as a threshold. But I wouldn't be giving them a percentage of just straight revenue until over 20 grand. Just because I know I'm not making any money.
It's like a new income tax.
Yeah, exactly. Graduated.
Yeah.
Would you just curious to like I know me and Logan are basically both stepping into sales roles. Like the GM doesn't really have uh any say in like what's sold. They just have like what's scheduled. So that's my only hesitation of like, hey, revenue's on you. Cause like you have to put like I help them schedule each day. And like each day there's 100 door hangers in that. So like there is some sales, and then if they don't have any work or like training or initial mows, they're just hang door hangers basically all day. But
Yeah,
like
but
I'm
there's so
doing all
much.
the sales.
Yeah. Like, and you're governing the marketing spend too, right?
Yeah.
So it isn't super fair to them in one regard, but also, um, like I've seen GMs that like, can literally take a location with the same marketing spend and they double the revenue because they're super great at doing the door hangers, upselling customers, doing follow-up calls, talking to customers after a project and selling another project. So like they can do it. And if you just govern like, hey, this is how much we're spending on marketing, I'm gonna take care of the sales. Like I would just make sure there's like clear definitions of like what the spend is going to be, what they can expect. And if they start feeling like, oh, you're not closing the jobs, then you say, great, you do the follow-up calls.
You'd still recommend distributable cash as the incentive for both the model that we're looking at?
It doesn't really matter until they're in profit mode.
Yeah.
Until they're in profit mode, I would just be focusing on revenue.
Mhm.
And so whether you did like anything over 20% they get a percentage of, or if you'd say 5, 10, 15, 20, 30 grand, you start graduating a little bit more than the $20,000 segments. Either way, I'd just be focusing on revenue because I know if I can get them above a certain level, I can actually make it break even. And I would just heavily incentivize it. Even if you did like a jackpot, if I was starting a location from zero, I'd put a jackpot on like 2 straight months of revenue over a certain threshold. Because I know if I can get above that, you can burn 5, 10 grand a month on a location that's not performing well. So why not spend 10 grand on making a big jackpot if they cross 25 grand for 2 months in a row?
I like that.
You
I like
took
that even
out
for
enough
Columbus.
I have a question. So if we open new locations and we're going the extreme, like simple services, they're not even going to have dump trailers. Like if the cleanup can't be done with a ramp rack and trash cans, we're out. And so we're thinking we won't really have a lot of sales on the GM's responsibility list because it's all going to be OTP and instant quote essentially. And at that point, we were thinking about just having one salesperson in the office, like we hire them dedicated to sales, and they would do the follow-up calls for all the OTP and instant quotes that come through the office. So then our GMs don't do them at all. Like you have one guy, he has his script, he's good at it. He calls every territory we have. Like they come in, he does them. How much do you think that holds true? Like where we could just take sales responsibility off the GM's plate essentially, besides like, hey, you can hand out door hangers, but we're going to set your budget, do the EDDMs. Our marketing guys are going to do your campaign. Like we're going to use the math and know when to spend and when not to spend. And your job's just to manage it.
I'm a big fan of it. Like we were gonna do this year in my North Carolina locations. That was the plan. And the reason is because everyone's like, well, that's not really fair to the GM. This is my thought originally. It's like, well, it's not fair to the GM because they don't control their own destiny. But you already give them a certain amount of equipment. You already tell them where they're going to shop, park their trucks every night. There's already so many benchmarks that you're setting for them. And if you just said, hey, our pricing is across the board. No one's getting favorites. We all get the same leads. We spend the same amount in every single location. If the pricing is the same, that's governed by corporate, and we're shooting for these targets in terms of close ratio, and you got to take what you get and then work with it. I'm a fan of it.
Yeah, what my
Especially once you get
logic
above
was
3.
is if I took the volume of, say, the leads from 5 or 6 locations, I have enough that I can make some kind of commission package or close rate based package where you could get a really stellar sales guy that wants to make 60, 70, 80 a year that'll dedicate the reps on the phone, or he will be better or she will be better than any general manager would on their own because he's doing 50, 60, 70 all the time, 15 an hour. He's just doing them,
And
same thing
and
over and over
I would
again.
give him a company phone on iMessage and like literally set automations that every single incoming lead, as well as when an estimate is sent and when a customer accepts an estimate, and he's immediately supposed to be sending them a video. Like
Yeah, and
that's
then I
all they
figured
do.
he would learn the loom and all the stuff that I don't feel like doing. And as we get enough locations where he can't handle the leads, like he writes the book for the next guy. This is how you do it. Like this is the procedure. And he just runs the sales department from there. You just put people in this call center we already have.
If you can take sales off of a GM's plate, like the likelihood of them succeeding is so much higher because it's a skill that is the hardest thing to teach.
Yeah, I agree there with Augusta doing 1.4, 13, 15 team members this year. It's I've got skin in the game. I don't know many guys without skin in the game that will deal with the stress and the things that come along with that. And with spending more time with the guys doing lights, I really feel like the GM should focus on doing work and spending time with the team because they see our team sees me in the office, and some of them quite literally want to be a GM that doesn't have to produce anymore. And now I'm having to tell them, well, buddy, if you want to make more money, you're going to have to produce because this business model is changing and we're breaking up this big location.
Yeah, I also think you could find like more of the type of person you want to be a working GM if you take sales off the plate. You
Yeah,
know, like
I'd rather
it's a
deal with
different. It's hard to find someone that has both those qualities at a high tier.
I'd rather deal with 4 to 6 guys instead of 15 with the kind of subculture that comes along with that many of the team members.
The other question I had is how much money do you think you throw at a new location? Like, say you want to get it to 20,000 fast, but you can also only spend your way into so much penetration. Like, a lot of it's just time there. Like, people need to die, houses need to sell. Like, you can do so much. How much would you go, like, cost per lead before you're like, enough's enough, even in a new location? Like, say next year we cut our marketing spend in the 3 we have, they're in profit mode already. I could throw as much money as I want at it, right? We're probably spitting off 25,000 a month in profit, give or take. And but I also know, like, you don't want to get to $500 per acquisition. It's just never going to balance out.
Yeah, like the funny thing I always find is when people go to buy like a location out, they're happy to pay $300-400 per customer. But then when it comes to, like, getting new customers, we all like freak out at 60, 70, $80. Like I'm happy to pay up to 200. Because I know that we on average will get 2,000 per year. And if you can increase the lifetime value of the customer high enough, you can spend more. So like that's why, like, it's so important about winter services and Christmas lights, is because if you can take a mowing customer, usually you get $1,000 for, get them into say 1,500 even because they accept winter services, immediately I can spend 50% more on the customer acquisition cost and make sense of it. And so as long as someone can upsell people enough and get the annual value high enough, I think $200. Anything below
What
that,
would
I can usually make sense of.
what would be helpful is a graph where one axis is time in business and one axis is revenue
Yeah.
per month and how much you'd spend depending on those two factors.
The challenging part too is it really hinges on your churn. Because if someone comes in, they're like, well, I'm going to spend a bunch of money, but then they have a bad general manager, they have massive amount of employee churn, lots of yellow slips and callbacks, and their churn is 50% a year. Well, now all of a sudden, the lifetime value of that customer is so low. It's maybe only $2,000 for the life of the customer. Now it's a little harder to spend 10% of revenue on a customer's lifetime on the acquisition. So it is very dependent on churn, because there's some people in Augusta, their churn is like 15%, which is essentially the simply the amount of people that move 7 to 8 years.
That's
Like,
what I was going to say earlier. We were talking about GM and sales. I found, especially in Rockport and Corpus that have been around years, like a lot of trucks, the best way my GMs help month to month revenue is attrition. Anything to help attrition because we're already getting the volume we're going to get. It's just keeping the ones, and we track everyone, right? And we lose very little because of quality, but every one of them, those sting the most. You're like, that's a problem.
yeah, and the GM can really make an impact there. So it's like, well, they don't come, they don't get incoming sales, for example, if you're handling them for them, but they're massive impact of whether attrition, so.
Also, one thing we don't really know is we're moving Joe to be regional manager, but I honestly don't even know what his job description is going to be. I'm like, put out fires when they happen. That's number one. And then I was like, you could help do a coaching call with them, do their coaching cards, have a weekly something or another that I don't do currently. But like, I think some
Is
framework around what a 40 budgeted hour regional manager's job should look like. I have no idea. We're just going to wing it. That's what Connor's
the
kind of doing.
the regional manager is like we're experiencing it right now is like it's a safety net. Like there's probably weeks where Thomas is way overpaid. Like Thomas is paid far more than me. However, he's a safety net for me to go continue on and do other things and do the acquisition that we're doing in South Park and not have to worry about the northern locations. It's like because when you need them, you want them, and there might be weeks you overpay him, but then there's also going to be weeks like this where Thomas is going to buckle up and he's got a couple 60, 70 hour weeks ahead of him to get things back in shape going into the winter.
Yeah, I mean, I sat down with Joe and we kind of talked about it because he wanted to know what I expected. And I told him, I said, I just expect you to take all the problems I have now, and if you call me, it better be a real problem.
Yeah, that's why
I'll pay you X amount of money to fill that role.
Yeah. That's why I had mentioned the other day, like I think between 2 and 5 locations is a little bit of a wilderness, because you got to get that regional user around that third location. And that's why we're selling the executives at 6, because like we want them to start at the point where the regional it's a full-time job. Because if you have 6 general managers and one quits every year or every 6 months, you have to have a regional step in, cover for them, find another one, train someone up, and like that's their job every 6 months. And so it makes more sense at
Yeah,
that size.
For us, it was interesting. That's why we chose to do 2, because I was like, he'll have more problems because we're not opening them all at once. So 3 if his 5 GMs have been in place for years, like they don't give me problems. They don't even call me. They're not going to call him, unless there's an auto accident or something. So I was like, well, he needs something to do.
Yeah, like the big thing is a matter of it's a bumper between you and the GMs. Like you do not want to have to, once you're past 3 of them, you don't want to be managing every one of their problems. You want a regional in between you. It's just so much easier. And it's worth the money if they're all if you have at least 3 in profit mode, it's worth the hit in profit.
For me, I think it's nice because you have someone to hold accountable for the stuff you should do that you don't. Like this year, I was slow on Christmas light marketing material, and I told Isaac, I said next year we won't, because that's going to be Joe's problem, and I'll make sure it gets done.